The Dodgers and Yankees have completely revamped their bullpens, and given that early projections have a repeat of the 2024 World Series matchup as the most likely scenario for this coming season, these two new look units could have massive impact on 2025's champion. But it's not just about the playoffs. How these two teams remade their bullpens leaves clues for how other organizations might follow suit. MLB, of course, is a copycat league. Let's start with the Dodgers, who after convincing Roki Sasaki that they can keep him healthy, said, well, actually, we didn't spend too much money on that, so let's go get the best reliever on the market in Tanner Scott, and add to him a pitcher coming off one of the best contact neutralizing seasons in the sport, Kirby Yates. I'd argue Tanner Scott has the best left-handed fastball in baseball, and Stuff Plus agrees with me, giving it a 20-point edge over the next highest pitch, which is a massive gap. And I'll jump in to point out the Dodgers have the top 2 graded lefty fastballs in baseball and 3 of the top 9. So if you're wondering whether they like four-seam shape, I would say unequivocally yes, probably more than anything else. Scott's fastball grades out well because he nails a combination of factors. First off, it's hard, averaging 97 miles per hour last season. He's also getting 1 inch more vertical break than you would expect from his arm angle. And when you consider his height and his extension down the mound, his resulting release height at this point in space is half a foot lower than the MLB average. This helps flatten out the line his fastball takes to the top of the zone, making him tough on guys with more dramatic upswings through the strike zone as they try to match a pitch's incoming plane. A small byproduct of Scott's ability to create this weird approach angle is that Scott doesn't have the greatest fastball command. Tyler Zombro of Tread Athletics and now the Chicago Cubs pointed out in a video that big extension types like Scott have a longer distance to go from this layback point to ball release, which presents the opportunity for some variance in release angle, which is connected to command. It's a really fancy way to say maybe his extension has some connection back to his ability to throw strikes. So if you're going to knock Scott, it's in his walk rate, which was 12% or about 3 or 4 percentage points higher than the average we usually see for a reliever. That same knock of having a poor walk rate is one you could tag on the Dodgers' other acquisition, Kirby Yates. It's just in Yates' case, it's due to a different reason. He throws a splitter, which is one of my favorite pitches in baseball, but one that is rarely in the zone and is often difficult to command because of the natural variance splitters have. Yates' splitter has always been good because it's hard relative to his fastball. There's only about a 7 mile per hour difference in velocity, and it has almost 15 inches less induced vertical break than his fastball, which means it's dropping a lot. Last year, however, it was Yates' fastball that took off. I think this is because of a location change specifically to left-handed hitters that help him disguise his splitter at the bottom of the zone better. But enough of my rambling. Why would the Dodgers add the 2 relievers on the market with really high walk rates? Old school people will say, I just don't want runners on base late in games. And to some extent, they're correct. Last year, the correlation between team bullpen walk rate and team bullpen ERA was around 0.5, a very strong correlation, suggesting that, a decent amount of the time, a bad bullpen ERA was connected to the runners on base via walk. But a lot of old school arguments seem to be pretty absolutist, unwilling to consider other variables, and that is the case we have with Scott and Yates. If you walk a ton of guys but strike out everybody and don't allow barrels, then it's probably okay to accept those walks. Yates and Scott last year among relievers with more than 50 innings were inside the 75th percentile in both strikeout rate and barrels allowed, meaning at best only a quarter of the league's relievers limited barrels and generated strikeouts better than those two. This fits beautifully with the Dodgers because last season you'll be surprised to find out that their relievers allowed the second highest barrel rate in baseball to only the Toronto Blue Jays. And it was the first season since 2014 where the Dodgers relievers had a FIP or fielder independent pitching in the bottom half of the league, and a strong portion of that FIP connected to the amount of barrels and home runs the team allowed. So the Dodgers revamped their pen with these 2 additions, a focus on limiting barrels, accepting more walks, and I think it's a strategy that's going to bear some fruit in 2025. Zip's projections currently have them as the 9th best bullpen in baseball. And if you're making me a betting man in this particular scenario, I would bet they finish higher than that, let's say top 6 or 5, similar to what they'd done from 2020 to 2023 and just ripped off a dominant run of bullpen performance. The Yankees' approach to polishing off their bullpen was different. They made 2 trades, first acquiring Devin Williams from the Brewers for Nestor Cortez, and then acquiring Fernando Cruz from the Reds for framing god Jose Trevino. Williams, as we know, throws a really wacky changeup. It's basically a left-handed slider from a right-handed pitcher, which I totally get makes no sense, but because of how he clips the top of the ball at release and the force at which he does so, the spin rate of the pitch is an outlier among basically all changeups. It's one of the true unicorn pitches in MLB. Cruz, on the other hand, was a stat nerd favorite last season, featuring one of the best splitters in baseball. His split is distinct because it doesn't have a lot of arm side movement. This comps to Roki Sasaki's incoming splitter, Hurston Waldrop's, and not many others. Now, is less horizontal movement better on a splitter? I don't necessarily think that's the case. Otherwise, you'd probably have a lot of organizations and pitchers chasing this kind of offering. But what happens a lot of the times in stuff models is they just don't properly grade something out well, partially because it's going off historic information. And if there's not a lot of that pitch that existed in the past, then how do we project it going forward? That's probably the edge that a guy like Cruz has on his splitter overall, and it being less arm side than other splitters hitters conventionally see. But you're noticing the trend here, right? Devin Williams and Fernando Cruz are 2 guys that throw arm side soft pitches or changeups and splits as their primary non-fastball. Well, can I interest you in 2 other relievers in the Yankees bullpen who do the exact same thing? Luke Weaver and Mark Leiter Jr. They also throw arm side soft pitches a lot. Weaver a changeup and Leiter Jr. a splitter. In fact, this Yankee bullpen will have 4 pitchers at the back end that all throw changeups or splitters to right-handed hitters, near 3 times the rate at which righties usually see changeups from right-handed pitchers. We usually see right changeups or splits about 7% of the time. Devin Williams and Fernando Cruz both threw right changeups or splits over 40% of the time last year. Weaver and Leiter Jr. were both over 20% right changeups or splits last year, and will likely be around that mark again. Now, this is weird, and it's hard to contextualize just how weird, but I sorted for bullpens since we've had StatCast that posted the highest rate of right changeups or splitters. And atop it are the 2021 and 22 Brewers, thanks to who? Devin Williams, who is now on the Yankees. And think about it this way, the second highest rate of split or change usage to righties last year from a right-handed pitcher was Fernando Cruz. And the rate at which Leiter and Weaver use right changeups and splits is greater than any of the totals we see on this historic list. So even if the Yankees use guys like Jake Cousins and Jonathan Loaisiga to kind of split up these guys who are throwing a bunch of right changeups and splits, my prediction is that the Yankees will throw the highest amount of right changeups plus splitters in MLB in the StatCast era. I'm going to guess they're above 20%. Now, does this matter at all? I honestly have no idea, but I do think it's distinct. And with that distinction means that hitters don't see this a lot. A lot of right-handed hitters don't see a ton of changeups from right-handed pitchers, and maybe that creates a subtle advantage. And that advantage could be particularly valuable in the postseason. And sure, maybe the Yankees are just gathering individual pitches they think are good and running into this particular subset, but maybe there's some intention behind it. Sweepers were all the rage a few years ago, but we've seen a decrease in their effectiveness as the league has adjusted. So it doesn't really make much sense for an organization now to buy into the sweeper revolution and rip them at an abnormally high rate. Like most industries, you have to kind of stay ahead of the curve to find an edge. And maybe the Yankees think that edge is in a pitch that's pretty underutilized relative to its results. Sliders are the best right on right. I don't think you can debate that. But splitters and changeups have higher swinging strike rates, even if their barrel rates aren't as good as those right sliders. And if you select for the best splitters and changeups in baseball, as the Yankees seem to be doing, I can imagine some evening of the results between changeups and sliders from right-handed pitchers to right-handed hitters. This brings me to the ultimate point of this video. Is there anything we can see in the reconstruction of the Yankees and Dodgers bullpens that suggest a trend that other teams might try to attach to. My guess is that it has to do with the idea of accepting more walks, specifically in exchange for better batted ball outcomes from a late game strategy perspective. I think teams that regularly make the postseason are becoming barrel shy. They don't want to give their opponent any situation in which they can swing a game back into their favor, which is routinely done through late game home runs. Now, these organizations might be more willing to accept barrels and chase strikeouts early in the game, knowing that they'd be able to claw their way back. But the second you get into late game situations, I'm okay as an org letting you try to double and single your way to 2 to 3 runs, but I'm not willing to let you barrel your way and cut that difference down and impact the win expectancy of a game much more dramatically in those late game situations. So that's just my kind of macro theory assessment of how these two teams have rebuilt their bullpens, specifically with an eye on the postseason, creating a super bullpen, but doing it in a way that subtly brings in elements of maybe where these organizations think the game is going. The last thought I'll give you is that perhaps these two organizations think that in the next year or two, hitters will catch up and be able to chase barrels at a more effective rate, and pitching will decline slightly. And as a result of that, these two teams are trying to get ahead of that by focusing more on barrel limiting contact. But I do think that that is maybe more of a pipe dream. I've thought for a while that maybe hitters swing back. And I do think in the long term, we will have more of like an offensive revolution. But for now, the data that's available on the pitching side is just way too strong and deep for hitting, I think, to make any impression and surpass pitching in terms of which is more advanced. So those are my thoughts on this topic, on bullpens generally. If you have any thoughts, as always, I'll be in the comments. Chat it up. Thank you, as always, for watching.